On your knees. Hands behind your head. Now. The command cut through the night like a siren before the sirens even started. Red and blue lights bled across the asphalt, reflecting off the sleek black curves of the Superbike like broken glass under neon rain. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, a quiet mechanical heartbeat in the middle of a suddenly frozen highway. Maya Carter didn't move right away. Her boots were planted firm on the rough shoulder, gravel pressing against the soles, the faint smell of hot rubber and engine oil rising into the cool air. A line of cars slowed as they passed, headlights stretching into long white streaks, drivers turning their heads just enough to watch without getting involved. The city hummed somewhere in the distance, but here, in this narrow strip of road under flickering streetlights, everything narrowed down to breath, light, and the sound of authority tightening its grip. "You didn't hear me?" Officer Daniel Hayes stepped closer, his voice sharper now, edged with impatience that didn't try to hide itself. His hand hovered near his belt, posture rigid, practiced. Behind him, two more cruisers idled, engines low, doors half open like waiting jaws. Maya slowly lifted her hands, not rushed, not defiant, just controlled. The leather of her jacket creased softly as her arms rose, fingers steady in the cold air. She lowered herself to her knees, gravel biting through denim, the sensation immediate and grounding. Somewhere to her left, a phone camera clicked on. A faint whisper, a muffled laugh, a comment she couldn't quite make out. It didn't matter. She kept her eyes forward. The world had a way of shrinking when people thought they understood you. Hayes circled her slightly, boots crunching against the roadside debris, his shadow stretching long across her back under the rotating lights. "Nice bike," he muttered, tone shifting into something colder, something heavier than procedure. Not exactly what I'd expect. The words hung there, unfinished but clear enough. Maya's gaze flicked, just once, toward the polished tank of the motorcycle. The reflection stared back at her, distorted, split by streaks of red and blue. A version of herself shaped by someone else's assumptions. She said nothing. Silence wasn't weakness. It was space. And space, when held long enough, had weight. "Hands back," Hayes ordered. She complied, fingers interlacing behind her head, elbows angled outward. The metal of the cuffs caught the light as he pulled them free, a sharp, clean sound as they opened. Click. The first wrist locked. Cool steel against warm skin. Click. The second followed, firm but not rough, final but not violent. The sound echoed louder than it should have, like something sealing more than just a moment. For a second, no one spoke. Not Hayes. Not the other officers. Not the small crowd forming at a distance. Even the wind seemed to pause, caught somewhere between movement and stillness. Maya's breathing stayed even, measured, her chest rising beneath the weight of the night. Her eyes didn't drop. They didn't plead. They held. Somewhere beyond the flashing lights, beyond the watching strangers and the quiet judgment in the air, a black SUV rolled slowly onto the shoulder, its headlights dim, its presence almost unnoticed. Maya didn't turn toward it. Not yet. Instead, she let the silence stretch just a little longer, until it began to press back against the people who had created it. Hayes glanced over his shoulder, then back at her, something flickering behind his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or just the faintest crack in the certainty he wore like a badge. "We'll see what you're really doing out here," he said, more to himself than to her. Maya Carter didn't answer. She didn't need to, because sometimes the truth didn't rush in to defend itself. Sometimes it waited, and when it arrived, it didn't raise its voice. It changed the room. The metal held steady against her wrists, not tight enough to hurt, but present enough to remind her of exactly where she was. The flashing lights continued their rhythm, red to blue, blue to red, painting everything in cycles of authority and assumption. Officer Hayes stepped back half a pace, radio already in his hand. "Dispatch, I need a full check," he said, voice clipped, professional again, as if the moment before had not carried anything extra. He read off her information from the license he had taken from her jacket pocket, each word falling into the night with a dull, procedural weight. Maya listened without reacting, her gaze drifting past him, past the patrol cars, toward the stretch of highway that disappeared into darkness. A semi-truck roared by in the far lane, the gust of wind brushing against her shoulders, carrying the faint scent of diesel and distant rain. Somewhere behind her, one of the other officers shifted his stance. Gravel crunched. A door closed. Small sounds, ordinary, but amplified in the stillness that followed. "You ride like that often?" Hayes asked after a moment, not looking directly at her this time, his eyes flicking between her and the bike as if trying to solve a puzzle that did not fit his expectations. Maya tilted her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the question, but she did not answer. The silence stretched again, heavier now, less comfortable. He exhaled through his nose, turning away, as if her lack of response confirmed something he had already decided. "Figures," he muttered under his breath. The radio crackled. Static first, then a voice, distant and mechanical. "Stand by," dispatch replied. "Running it now." Time slowed in that strange way it did when everyone was waiting for something unseen to arrive. Maya felt the rough edge of a small stone press into her knee, the ground uneven beneath her. Her shoulders remained relaxed, her breathing steady, controlled down to the smallest detail. She had learned that control was not about force. It was about presence, about choosing what not to react to. Hayes paced once, twice, his boots tracing a short line between the cruiser and the shoulder. His partner leaned against the hood of the second car, arms crossed, watching with a casual interest that masked curiosity. "You got somewhere you were supposed to be tonight?" Hayes asked again, louder this time, as if filling the silence with sound would give him back control of the scene. Maya finally spoke, her voice calm, even, carrying just enough to reach him without rising above the hum of the idling engines. "Everyone does." The answer was simple, but it landed differently than he expected. He turned his head toward her, eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in something closer to confusion. It was not defiance. It was not submission. It was something in between, something he did not have a category for. Before he could respond, the radio crackled again, sharper this time. "Unit 3, we are having a delay on the system," dispatch said. "Repeat, delay. Stand by." Hayes frowned, glancing down at the device as if it had failed him personally. "What do you mean delay?" he asked, irritation creeping into his tone. "It is a standard check." Static answered him for a second, then the voice returned, more uncertain now. "Database is not pulling full records. Might be a connection issue. Try again in a minute." He lowered the radio slowly, jaw tightening. The certainty he had walked into the situation with began to thin, just slightly, like fog lifting in uneven patches. He looked back at Maya, studying her more carefully now, as if seeing her for the first time instead of through the lens he had started with. Her posture had not changed. Her expression had not shifted. Even with her hands restrained, there was no tension in her shoulders, no urgency in her movements. Just stillness. Just control. In the distance, the black SUV rolled a few feet closer along the shoulder, its tires whispering against the pavement. It stopped again, quiet, patient, its headlights dimmed just enough to blend into the scene rather than interrupt it. One of the officers glanced toward it briefly, then dismissed it as just another vehicle pulled over to watch. Maya's eyes flicked toward it for the briefest second, then back forward, as if marking a point in time only she understood. Hayes followed her gaze instinctively, his attention catching on the SUV for a moment longer this time. Something about it lingered in his mind, a detail that did not quite settle. He turned back to her, slower now, less certain than before. "You mind telling me why your record is not coming up?" he asked, the edge in his voice replaced by something more cautious. Maya let a small breath out, not a sigh, not impatience, just air leaving her lungs in a controlled rhythm. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "things do not show up when you expect them to." The words hung there, simple, but carrying a weight that shifted the air between them. Hayes stared at her for a second longer, the flashing lights reflecting in his eyes, turning blue, then red, then blue again. Behind him, the radio hissed softly, waiting. And somewhere just beyond the edge of the scene, something unseen was already moving closer, not with noise, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty that did not need to announce itself. The air shifted before anyone said a word, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment just before a storm decides whether it will break. Officer Hayes adjusted his grip on the radio, eyes still on Maya, but no longer with the same certainty he had started with. The flashing lights painted her face again, red, then blue, but her expression did not change. She remained still, grounded, as if the asphalt beneath her was steadier than the authority standing above her. Behind him, the second officer straightened from the hood of the cruiser, his posture less relaxed now, attention sharpening in response to something he could not yet name. "Dispatch, run it again," Hayes said, slower this time, each word deliberate, as if precision might fix what instinct could not. The radio hissed, then answered with a slight delay. "Copy that." Reattempting now. The pause that followed stretched longer than before, thick with unspoken questions. A car passed, slower than traffic should allow, its driver leaning just enough to see, headlights briefly washing over the scene before fading into the distance. The black SUV remained where it was, engine quiet, presence steady. This time, Hayes did not look away from it immediately. His gaze lingered, then returned to Maya, and for the first time, he studied her without the filter of assumption. Her jacket was worn, but not careless. Her boots were scuffed, but maintained. Even the way she held herself, restrained yet composed, did not match the narrative he had already begun building in his head. "You ever been stopped before?" he asked, voice lower now, less accusatory, more searching. Maya let a second pass before answering, not out of hesitation, but out of choice. "Not like this," she said. The words were simple, but they landed with a quiet weight that pressed against the edges of the moment. Hayes nodded once, as if acknowledging something he could not fully articulate, then glanced back at the SUV again. This time, he noticed the details. The clean lines, the tinted windows, the way it had positioned itself just outside the immediate glow of the patrol lights, close enough to see, far enough not to interfere. It was not curiosity that brought a vehicle to a stop like that. It was intent. The radio crackled again, sharper now, pulling his attention back. "Unit 3, dispatch said, voice tighter than before. "We are getting partial returns, but access is restricted." "Repeat, restricted." Hayes blinked, the word catching in his mind like a loose thread. "Restricted how?" he asked, his tone no longer carrying authority, but uncertainty. Static filled the space for a second, then the reply came, quieter, more careful. "Federal flag. We do not have clearance to pull full data." The silence that followed was different. Not empty, not passive. It pressed inward, closing the space between what was known and what was assumed. Hayes lowered the radio slowly, his fingers tightening slightly around it. He looked at Maya again, really looked this time, and something behind his eyes shifted, not fully, but enough to fracture the certainty he had been standing on. "You want to explain that?" he asked, but the question lacked the edge it had carried before. It was no longer a demand. It was a reach. Maya lifted her gaze to meet his, steady, unflinching, her voice calm when she spoke. "You are seeing exactly what you are allowed to see." The words settled into the air, quiet but undeniable. One of the officers behind Hayes shifted again, glancing between them, then toward the SUV, tension threading through his posture. The moment was no longer just a routine stop. It was something else, something none of them had fully prepared for. Hayes exhaled slowly, running a hand along the back of his neck, the motion small but revealing. He turned halfway toward the SUV, his attention drawn to it now without resistance. The driver's side door remained closed, the windows unreadable, but the presence inside was no longer invisible. It was waiting, and it knew something they did not. "Who was in that vehicle?" Hayes asked, not to Maya, not to dispatch, but to the space itself, as if the answer might come from the silence pressing in around them. Maya did not turn to look. She did not need to. "Someone who does not like delays," she said. The faintest hint of movement flickered behind the tinted glass of the SUV, barely noticeable, but enough to confirm what the moment had already begun to reveal. Hayes felt it then, not fear, not exactly, but the realization that the ground beneath the situation had shifted, and he was no longer standing at the highest point. The lights continued to flash, the road continued to hum, but the balance of the moment had begun to tilt, slowly, quietly, towards something he could not yet control. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, like pressure building in a sealed room, subtle but undeniable. Officer Hayes stood still for a moment longer than he meant to, his attention caught between the woman kneeling on the gravel and the black SUV that no longer felt like a coincidence. The red and blue lights continued their slow rotation, washing over the scene in pulses, but now they felt less like control and more like exposure. One of the backup officers cleared his throat softly, the sound small but sharp in the quiet. "You want me to check the vehicle?" he asked, gesturing slightly toward the SUV, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty he did not bother to hide. Hayes did not answer right away. His eyes stayed on Maya, searching her face for something that would anchor the moment back into something familiar, something procedural. But there was nothing there that fit. No panic, no urgency, just a calm that did not belong to someone in her position. He turned slowly toward the SUV instead, each step measured, the gravel crunching under his boots louder than before. The distance between him and the vehicle was no more than 20 feet, but it stretched in his mind, filled with questions he did not have answers. 2. Behind him, the radio hissed again, but he did not reach for it this time. The SUV remained still, engine low, headlights dimmed. No sudden movement, no attempt to leave, just presence. Hayes stopped a few steps short, his posture tightening slightly, not aggressive, not defensive, but alert. "This is Officer Hayes," he called out, voice firm but controlled. "I need you to step out of the vehicle." The words hung in the air, clear, official, but lacking the certainty they would have carried minutes ago. For a second, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the driver's side door opened. Not abrupt, not hesitant, controlled. A polished shoe touched the pavement first, followed by the steady movement of someone who was not in a hurry because they did not need to be. A man stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in a dark suit that caught the faint light without reflecting it. He closed the door with a quiet click that seemed louder than it should have been. He did not raise his hands. He did not rush forward. He simply stood there for a moment, looking at Hayes with a calm that mirrored Maya's, as if the two were connected by something unspoken. Hayes felt it then, more clearly now. The shift, the subtle transfer of control that had already begun before he noticed it. "Sir," Hayes said, adjusting his stance slightly, "this is an active stop. I am going to need you to identify yourself." The man did not reach for his wallet immediately. Instead, his gaze moved past Hayes, settling briefly on Maya, still kneeling, still composed, the metal cuffs catching the light. Something unreadable passed across his face, not anger, not surprise, but recognition. Then he looked back at Hayes. "You have been trying to access her file," the man said, his voice even, measured, carrying authority without raising volume. Hayes blinked, the statement catching him off guard. "That is correct," he replied, instinctively straightening. "And the system flagged it as restricted." The man nodded once, as if confirming a detail he already knew. "That is because you are not supposed to see it," he said. The words were not confrontational. They were factual, and that made them heavier. Hayes felt his grip on the situation loosen just slightly, like something slipping through his fingers. Behind him, one of the officers shifted again, the tension now visible in the way he stood, the way his attention flicked between the man and Maya. "With all due respect," Hayes said carefully, choosing his words now instead of relying on instinct, "I still need to understand what is going on here." The man reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, pulling out a small leather wallet. He opened it just enough to reveal a badge, the metal catching a brief flash of red and blue before settling into the dim light. Hayes leaned forward slightly, his eyes focusing, processing, recalibrating. The world around him did not stop, but it felt like it narrowed, like everything outside this moment had faded just enough to make space for what he was seeing. He did not speak right away. The badge stayed visible for only a second longer before the man closed the wallet again, returning it to his jacket with the same controlled motion. "You have detained someone you do not understand," the man said quietly, "and you are about to make that situation worse if you do not slow down." Hayes exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him heavier than it should have. He glanced back at Maya, still in the same position, still silent, and for the first time, the image did not match the story he had built at the start of the stop. It did not fit at all. The lights continued to flash. The road continued to hum. But the center of the moment had shifted completely, and Hayes could feel it in the way his own voice did not come as easily as before. Somewhere in the distance, another set of headlights approached, then slowed, then stopped. The scene was no longer contained. It was unfolding. and he was no longer the one deciding how. The weight of the moment settled fully now, not in noise, not in movement, but in the quiet shift of who was actually in control. Officer Hayes stood facing the suited man, his posture no longer rigid with command, but recalibrating in real time, trying to reconcile procedure with something far outside its limits. The flashing lights continued to sweep across their faces, red, then blue, then red again, but the colors felt different now, less like authority and more like exposure. Hayes glanced once more at the badge that had already disappeared back into the man's jacket, as if his mind needed to confirm it had been real. "Sir," he began, slower now, choosing each word carefully. "If there is federal involvement, I need clarification before I proceed." The man did not step closer. He did not raise his voice. He simply held his position, hands relaxed at his sides, presence steady in a way that did not require reinforcement. "What you need," he replied evenly, "is to recognize when a situation has moved beyond your scope." The words were not harsh. They were precise, and they landed deeper because of it. Behind Hayes, one of the officers shifted again, the earlier confidence replaced with a quiet alertness. The scene had changed, and everyone felt it, even if no one said it out loud. Hayes turned his head slightly, looking back toward Maya. She was still on her knees, still composed, the cuffs reflecting the rotating lights in small, steady flashes. For a brief second, the image struck him differently than before. Not as control, not as compliance, but as something that did not belong where it was. He looked back at the suited man. "Then help me understand what I am looking at," Hayes said, the edge of command gone now, replaced by something closer to respect, or at least caution. The man's gaze shifted briefly toward Maya again, then back. "You are looking at someone who chose not to stop you," he said. Hayes frowned slightly, the meaning not landing immediately. "Chose not to," he repeated, more to himself than to the man. The radio at his shoulder crackled again, louder this time, almost urgent. "Unit 3, dispatch said, voice tight, we are escalating this. Federal notification just came through. You are advised to stand down and await further instruction." The words cut clean through the moment, removing any remaining doubt. Hayes did not respond right away. He lowered the radio slowly, his hand lingering on it as if it were the last familiar piece of the situation. He looked at Maya again, longer this time, and something behind. His eyes shifted fully. Not confusion, not resistance, recognition, not of who she was exactly, but of what she was not. She was not what he had assumed, not even close. "Why did you not say anything?" he asked, the question leaving him before he could stop it. Maya lifted her head slightly, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since he had placed the cuffs on her. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, carrying no trace of accusation. "Because you were not ready to hear it." The answer settled into the space between them, quiet but final. Hayes exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him heavier than before. He reached toward the cuffs, his hand pausing for just a fraction of a second before continuing, as if acknowledging the weight of what he was about to undo. The metal clicked once, then again, the sound sharp but not harsh, releasing rather than restraining. Maya brought her hands forward slowly, not rushing, not pulling away, just allowing the motion to complete itself. She stood up in one smooth movement, brushing a bit of dust from her knee without looking down, her posture returning to its natural alignment, as if the interruption had never truly taken hold. The distance between her and Hayes remained the same, but the dynamic had shifted entirely. He stepped back half a pace, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The suited man watched without comment, his expression unchanged, but the tension in the air began to ease, just slightly. In the background, the black SUV remained still, its presence no longer hidden, no longer secondary. It had always been part of the moment. Hayes lowered his hand, the empty cuffs now hanging loosely, their weight different than before. "Ma'am," he said, the word deliberate now, respectful, no longer automatic. "I was following procedure." Maya nodded once, acknowledging the statement without accepting or rejecting it. "I know," she replied quietly. The simplicity of it removed any need for further explanation. The lights continued to flash. The road continued to hum. But the moment had already turned, not with force, not with noise, but with a quiet shift in understanding that could not be reversed. The night did not return to normal after that. It only pretended to. The red and blue lights still rotated, the cruisers still idled, and the highway still carried its distant hum. But something deeper had shifted, something that could not be reset by simply unlocking a pair of cuffs. Maya rolled her shoulders once, a subtle motion, loosening the space where the metal had pressed against her skin, then let her arms rest naturally at her sides. She did not rush to her bike. She did not step away. She simply stood there, present, grounded, as if the moment still had something left to say. Officer Hayes remained a few feet in front of her, the empty cuffs hanging from his hand, their quiet weight now different, almost heavier without purpose. He looked at them briefly, then clipped them back onto his belt with a controlled motion, as if restoring order to something internal as much as external. His eyes lifted again to meet hers, but this time, he did not hold the gaze as long. Not out of avoidance, but out of awareness. The suited man near the SUV took a slow step forward, closing a small portion of the distance, his shoes making almost no sound against the pavement. "We are done here," he said, not loudly, not sharply, but with a finality that did not need emphasis. Hayes nodded once, instinctively, then paused, the motion catching halfway as something in him resisted letting the moment end that cleanly. "Sir," he said, turning slightly toward the man, "if there is an operation in play, I need to know if my presence compromised anything." The question came from training, from responsibility, from the part of him that still held on to procedure even as it bent around something larger. The man studied him for a second, then gave a small, measured shake of his head. "Not yet," he replied. But it almost did. The honesty of it landed without judgment, but it did not soften the impact. Hayes absorbed it quietly, his jaw tightening just enough to show that it mattered. Behind him, one of the other officers shifted again, his earlier confidence fully replaced by a careful stillness, as if unsure where he fit in a situation that no longer followed familiar lines. The second cruiser's engine idled lower, its headlights casting a pale wash across the edge of the road. A passing car slowed, then moved on, the driver deciding the moment was no longer worth watching. The crowd that had begun to form at a distance thinned just as quietly, curiosity dissolving once the tension no longer looked like spectacle. Maya turned her head slightly toward the SUV, her eyes settling on the man for a brief moment. No words passed between them, but something did, something measured and understood, like a silent confirmation that the line had not been crossed beyond repair. She stepped toward her bike then, slow, deliberate, each movement controlled. Her hand brushed lightly along the handlebar, fingers tracing the familiar curve of metal and grip, grounding herself back into something tangible. The engine was still warm, the faint heat rising into the cool night air. Hayes watched her, not with suspicion now, but with something closer to reflection. The image of her kneeling on the gravel lingered in his mind, but it no longer matched the person standing in front of him. It did not fit. "Ma'am," he said again, the word steadier this time, more certain in its respect. "I made an assumption." He did not dress it up. He did not add explanation. He let the statement stand on its own. Maya paused, her hand resting on the bike, then looked back at him. Her expression did not change, but her eyes held his for a moment longer than before. "You made a decision," she corrected quietly. "There is a difference." The distinction settled between them, subtle but sharp. Hayes nodded once, slower this time, the understanding not immediate, but real. "Understood," he said, and for the first time, the word carried weight beyond routine acknowledgement. The suited man turned slightly, glancing back toward the SUV as if measuring time against something unseen. "We need to move," he said, not to Hayes, not even directly to Maya, but to the moment itself. Maya nodded once in response, then reached for her helmet, lifting it from where it rested against the seat. The visor caught a brief flash of red and blue before settling into the darker tones of the night. She placed it on with practiced ease, fastening the strap with a quiet click that echoed just enough to mark the transition. Hayes stepped back another half step, clearing the space without being asked, the motion instinctive now. The boundary between them was no longer enforced. It was understood. Maya swung one leg over the bike, settling into position with a fluid motion that spoke of familiarity, control, ownership. She did not start the engine yet. For a brief second, she looked straight ahead, past the cruisers, past the road, as if aligning herself with something beyond the immediate scene. The suited man returned to the SUV, opening the door and stepping inside without urgency. The door closed softly behind him, the vehicle returning to its quiet, waiting state. Hayes stood still, watching, the earlier noise of authority replaced by a quieter awareness of what had just passed through his hands without him fully understanding it. The night carried on, but not the same way it had before. The engine came to life with a low, controlled rumble, not loud, not aggressive, but precise, like something built to respond without hesitation. The vibration traveled through the frame of the bike into Maya's hands, steady, familiar, grounding. The headlights cut forward into the dark stretch of highway, a clean beam that pushed past the fading red and blue behind her. For a moment, she did not move. The sound of the engine idling blended with the distant traffic, creating a quiet pocket where time seemed to hold its breath again. Officer Hayes stood just off to her left now, no longer blocking her path, no longer directing the moment. His posture had shifted fully, shoulders slightly lowered, stance open instead of rigid. He watched her, not with authority, not even with suspicion, but with a kind of focus that suggested he was trying to understand something that had already moved beyond explanation. The other officers remained near their vehicles, quieter than before, their earlier movements reduced to small adjustments, hands resting on belts, eyes scanning without purpose. The scene had lost its tension, but not its weight. Maya adjusted her grip on the handlebars, her gloved fingers tightening just slightly, then relaxing again. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the engine, slow, controlled, deliberate. She glanced once in the side mirror, catching a fragmented reflection of the flashing lights, the cruisers, and the figure of Hayes standing still against it all. The image was distorted by the curve of the glass, but clear enough to hold meaning. Behind her, the black SUV remained in place, engine low, presence steady. Its headlights stayed dim, but its outline was unmistakable now, no longer part of the background, but part of the moment that had reshaped everything. Hayes took a small step forward, then stopped himself, the motion instinctive but restrained. "Before you go," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach her over the engine, "I need to ask something." Maya did not turn fully. She tilted her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him without breaking her position. The highway stretched ahead of her, empty for the moment, open. "When you said I was not ready to hear it," Hayes continued, choosing his words carefully, "what would have made me ready?" The question lingered in the air, not rushed, not defensive, but genuine in a way that had not been present earlier. Maya let a second pass, then another, the engine idling steadily beneath her. She turned her head just enough to meet his gaze over her shoulder, the visor still raised, her eyes calm, steady, reflecting the faint light around them. "Nothing you could say," she replied quietly. "Only something you choose." The answer did not come with judgment. It came with clarity. Hayes absorbed it slowly, the meaning settling in layers rather than all at once. He nodded once, more to himself than to her, the motion small but deliberate. "Then I will remember that," he said. Maya held his gaze for a brief moment longer, then lowered the visor with a soft click, sealing herself back into the world she had come from. The sound marked a boundary, not between people, but between moments. She shifted her weight slightly, easing the bike forward just enough to feel the movement, then steadied it again. The road ahead was clear. The past few minutes remained behind her, but not erased, not forgotten, just placed where they belonged. Hayes stepped back fully now, clearing the lane without hesitation, his presence no longer an obstacle, but a witness. The other officers followed his lead without being told, moving subtly, creating space that had not existed before. The balance of the scene had changed completely, and everyone felt it. Maya gave the throttle a gentle twist, the engine responding instantly, smoothly, as if it had been waiting for permission. The bike rolled forward, slow at first, then gaining a steady pace as it merged back onto the highway. The red and blue lights faded in her mirrors, shrinking with each passing second, their intensity dissolving into distant color. The black SUV waited until she was several car lengths ahead, then its headlights brightened slightly, and it pulled onto the road behind her, maintaining distance, silent, watchful. Hayes remained where he was, standing at the edge of the shoulder, the night air cool against his face. The sound of her engine lingered for a moment longer, then blended into the rhythm of the highway until it was no longer distinguishable. He looked down briefly at his hands, then back up at the empty stretch of road where she had disappeared. The cruiser still idled. The lights still turned. But the meaning of all of it had shifted, not because someone had forced it to, but because, for a brief moment, someone had chosen not to. The highway opened wide ahead of her, lanes stretching into the dark like a path that had already been chosen long before this night began. Maya kept her speed steady, not pushing the engine, not pulling back, just maintaining a rhythm that matched the quiet precision in her chest. The wind pressed lightly against her jacket, slipping around her shoulders and past her helmet, a constant presence that reminded her she was moving forward, even when her mind remained anchored to what had just happened. In her mirror, the glow of red and blue had fully faded now, replaced by the softer, steady beams of the black SUV following at a measured distance. It did not close the gap. It did not fall behind. It simply remained, as constant as a shadow that did not need to be acknowledged to exist. She shifted lanes smoothly, checking her mirrors out of habit rather than necessity. The movement fluid, practiced, almost automatic. Every motion carried intention. Every adjustment had purpose. The city skyline began to rise faintly in the distance, a cluster of lights against the horizon, muted by the thin layer of haze that hovered above the road. Somewhere ahead, an exit sign flickered under overhead lamps, green and reflective, pointing toward a direction most drivers would take without thinking. Maya passed it without hesitation. The road she was on was not about convenience. It was about timing. Behind her, inside the SUV, the man in the dark suit sat quietly, his gaze forward, his posture unchanged. The dashboard lights cast a soft glow across his hands, resting calmly, fingers relaxed, as if nothing about the night required urgency. The driver kept both hands on the wheel, eyes steady, speed matched perfectly to Maya's without needing instruction. The silence inside the vehicle was not empty. It was deliberate. After a few miles, the man reached into his jacket and removed a small device, no larger than a phone, its screen dim until his thumb brushed across it. A series of coded lines flickered into view, brief, precise, then gone again as he locked the screen. He did not speak. He did not need to. The confirmation was enough. Ahead, Maya eased off the throttle slightly, the engine tone lowering just enough to signal a transition. Another exit approached, less marked, less traveled. She took it this time, guiding the bike onto a quieter road that curved gently away from the highway. The noise of traffic faded behind her, replaced by a softer stillness, broken only by the hum of her engine and the distant rustle of wind through scattered trees. The streetlights here were spaced farther apart, casting pools of light separated by stretches of shadow. She moved through them one by one, her silhouette appearing, then disappearing, then appearing again. The SUV followed without deviation, its headlights dimming slightly as it entered the same road, maintaining the same careful distance. Maya slowed further as the road narrowed, her senses adjusting to the change in environment. This was no longer open highway. This was controlled space. She turned once more, this time onto an even smaller street, lined with industrial buildings that stood quiet and dark at this hour. No movement, no traffic, just structure and silence. She brought the bike to a stop near the edge of a wide, empty lot, the engine idling for a second before she cut it completely. The sudden quiet felt heavier here, the absence of sound more noticeable without the constant flow of the highway. She removed her helmet slowly, setting it on the seat, her eyes scanning the area without rushing, without tension, just awareness. The SUV rolled in moments later, pulling up several yards behind her before coming to a smooth stop. The engine remained on for a second, then powered down, the headlights dimming until the space was lit only by the overhead lamps and the faint glow of the city in the distance. The driver stepped out first, moving with the same controlled ease, then opened the rear door. The suited man emerged, adjusting his jacket slightly as he stepped onto the pavement. He looked around once, taking in the surroundings, confirming what he already expected to find. Maya did not turn immediately. She let him approach, her posture relaxed but alert, her presence steady in the center of the quiet space. "You let it go further than expected," he said finally, his voice calm, measured, carrying just enough to reach her without breaking the stillness. Maya glanced at him over her shoulder, then turned fully, resting one hand lightly against the bike. "I needed to see where it would go," she replied. The answer was simple, but it carried layers that did not need to be explained. The man nodded once, understanding without asking more. "And?" he asked. Maya's gaze shifted briefly, not toward him, not toward the road, but somewhere between, as if measuring something that had already passed. "He stopped before it mattered," she said. The man studied her for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The night held its silence. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the moment, though quiet, had already moved into something deeper than either of them needed to say out loud. The quiet did not feel empty. It felt intentional, like every sound had been removed so that what remained could be heard more clearly. Maya stood beside the bike, one hand still resting lightly against the frame, her fingers tracing a faint line along the metal without really touching it. The cool night air settled around her, carrying the faint scent of asphalt and distant rain, the kind that never quite reached the ground. The suited man stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak without raising his voice, far enough to leave space that did not need to be negotiated. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The overhead lights hummed softly, flickering just enough to remind them that this place was not meant for comfort, only for function. "You took a risk," he said finally, his tone even, not accusatory, but not neutral either. Maya did not respond immediately. Her gaze drifted across the empty lot, over the edges of the buildings that stood silent and closed, their windows dark, their presence solid but lifeless. She let the words settle before answering, not out of hesitation, but out of discipline. "It was calculated," she replied. The distinction was small, but deliberate. The man studied her for a second longer, then nodded once, acknowledging the difference without challenging it. Behind him, the driver remained near the SUV, posture relaxed but attentive, eyes moving occasionally across the perimeter, checking, confirming, never lingering too long in one place. The vehicle itself sat quiet now, engine off, its earlier presence reduced to shape and shadow under the dim light. "You could have ended it sooner," the man continued, his voice still calm, but carrying a subtle weight now. "You had the authority." Maya shifted her weight slightly, her boots making a faint sound against the pavement. "Authority is not always the point," she said. The answer came without edge, without defense, just clarity. The man exhaled slowly, a breath that suggested understanding more than agreement. "And what was the point?" he asked. Maya turned her head toward him fully now, her expression steady, her eyes clear in the low light. "To see what happens when no one steps in," she said. The words lingered, quiet but heavy, pressing into the space between them. The man did not respond right away. His gaze moved past her briefly, toward the road they had come from, as if replaying something in his mind that could not be seen from here. "And what did you see?" he asked after a moment. Maya looked away again, her attention returning to the open lot, the empty distance stretching beyond it. "I saw hesitation," she said, "and I saw the moment before it turns into something else." The man's jaw tightened slightly, not in disagreement, but in recognition. He had seen that moment before, many times. "You were saying he stopped himself," he said. Maya nodded once. "He chose to." The distinction settled in the air again, the same quiet line between reaction and decision. The man took a slow step to the side, his shoes making a soft sound against the pavement, then folded his arms loosely, not defensive, just reflective. "Most do not," he said. Maya's expression did not change, but her eyes held something deeper now, something that did not need to be explained. "That is why it matters when one does," she replied. The overhead light flickered again, briefly dimming before stabilizing, casting a slightly different angle of shadow across the ground. The driver near the SUV shifted his stance, glancing once toward the far edge of the lot, then back, a silent check that everything remained as it should be. The world outside this space continued, unseen, unheard, but present. The man lowered his arms, his posture easing just slightly, the tension in his shoulders releasing in a way that suggested the conversation had reached its point. "Command will want a report," he said, his tone returning to something more procedural, more grounded. Maya gave a small nod. "They will get one," she said. The simplicity of it carried no resistance, no reluctance, just acceptance of what came next. For a moment longer, they stood in the quiet, the kind that did not need to be filled. The night held steady around them, the buildings unmoving, the lights humming, the air cool. And still. Then the man turned back toward the SUV, his steps measured, unhurried, as if the urgency of the earlier moment had already passed into something else. Maya remained where she was, her hand still resting lightly against the bike, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the immediate scene, as if the real weight of the night was not in what had happened, but in what had almost happened, and the choice that had kept it from crossing that line. The night settled deeper around the empty lot, the kind of quiet that did not fade but thickened, pressing gently against every movement, every breath. Maya finally lifted her hand from the bike, letting it fall naturally to her side as she straightened her posture fully. The moment had already passed, but its weight remained, not heavy, not overwhelming, just present in a way that did not allow it to be ignored. The suited man reached the SUV and paused with his hand resting on the door handle, glancing back at her one last time, as if measuring whether anything had been left unsaid. "There is one more thing," he said, his voice carrying across the open space without effort. Maya did not turn immediately. She took a slow breath, then shifted her gaze toward him, her expression unchanged. "What is it?" she asked. The man studied her for a brief second, then spoke with the same controlled clarity he had carried all night. "Command will ask why you did not identify yourself the moment the situation escalated." The question was not framed as criticism, but it carried the weight of expectation, of structure, of a system that preferred certainty over ambiguity. Maya's eyes held his, steady, unflinching. "Because the moment was not about me," she said. The answer came without hesitation, but it did not end there. The man did not respond right away. He waited, and she continued. "It was about what happens when someone believes they are right," she added quietly. The words settled into the space between them, simple on the surface, but layered beneath. The man's gaze shifted slightly, as if considering not just her answer, but the implication behind it. And if he had not stopped, he asked. The question carried a different weight now, not procedural, not detached, but personal in a way that had not been present before. Maya looked away for a brief moment, her eyes tracing the edge of the empty lot, the faint line where concrete met shadow. Then the outcome would have been different, she said. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The man nodded once, slowly, accepting the answer for what it was without pushing further. He opened the door of the SUV, then paused again, his hand still on the frame. "You gave him a chance," he said. Maya's gaze returned to him, her expression calm. "Everyone gets one," she replied. The simplicity of it carried a quiet finality, not idealistic, not naive, just measured. The man held her gaze for a second longer, then inclined his head slightly, a gesture small enough to almost be missed, but deliberate in its meaning. He stepped into the vehicle, closing the door with a soft, controlled motion that echoed faintly in the stillness. The driver moved to his seat without a word, the engine coming back to life with a low hum that broke the silence just enough to signal transition. Maya remained where she was for a moment longer, her eyes fixed on the now idling SUV. The overhead lights flickered again, casting brief shadows that shifted across the pavement like passing thoughts. She reached for her helmet, lifting it from the seat, her fingers steady, her movements unhurried. The strap clicked into place beneath her chin, sealing her focus back into the present. The engine of the bike roared softly as she started it again, the sound sharper in the quiet space, more defined without the noise of the highway to blend into. She did not move immediately. She let the engine settle, the vibration steady beneath her, grounding her once more in control, in motion, in choice. The SUV's headlights brightened slightly, then dimmed again, a silent signal that did not need explanation. Maya shifted her weight, guiding the bike into a slow turn, aligning herself with the narrow road that led back toward the city. For a brief moment, she paused, her gaze lifting toward the distant glow on the horizon, the faint outline of buildings rising against the dark. The world beyond this space waited, unchanged, unaware. Behind her, the SUV rolled forward, matching her movement without closing the distance, maintaining the same quiet presence it had held all night. Maya eased the throttle, the bike responding instantly, carrying her forward into the narrow road, the sound of the engine cutting through the stillness before fading into it. The lot behind her remained as it was, empty, silent, holding only the echo of a moment that had already passed. Inside the SUV, the man looked forward, his expression unreadable, but his mind no longer focused on the operation alone. Something about the night lingered, something not written in reports, not captured in data. A choice, a pause, a moment where authority met restraint and did not push further. The city lights grew brighter as they approached, the distance closing slowly, steadily. Maya did not look back. She did not need to. The road ahead was clear, but the meaning of the road behind her remained, not as a burden, not as a victory, but as something quieter, something that did not announce itself, something that simply stayed. The road narrowed again as the city began to rise around them, not all at once, but in layers, lights stacking over shadow, movement building beneath stillness. Maya kept her speed controlled, the engine steady beneath her, her posture aligned with the machine as if the two had long since learned to move as one. The glow of streetlights replaced the darkness of the industrial stretch, casting a warmer, more familiar tone across the pavement. Traffic returned gradually, a few cars at first, then more, each one unaware of what had unfolded miles behind them. In her mirror, the black SUV remained, still keeping its distance, still present without intrusion. It did not close the gap, even as the road widened. It did not need to. Maya shifted lanes smoothly, merging into the slow flow of vehicles entering the outer edge of the city. Brake lights flickered ahead, a quiet rhythm of red dots stretching into the distance. She adjusted her speed without thinking, her movements precise, her focus steady. But her mind was not on the traffic. It moved elsewhere, replaying. Not the moment itself, but the space inside it. The pause, the hesitation, the choice. Behind her, inside the SUV, the man in the dark suit leaned back slightly, his gaze fixed through the windshield as the city lights reflected across the glass. He did not speak. The driver did not ask questions. The silence between them was not emptiness. It was acknowledgement. After a few blocks, Maya signaled and exited onto a quieter street, one lined with older buildings, brick and glass, the kind that held history without needing to announce it. The noise of the main road softened again, replaced by the low hum of distant engines and the occasional echo of footsteps from sidewalks that were still awake at this hour. She slowed near an intersection, stopping briefly as a traffic light shifted from green to yellow, then to red. The engine idled beneath her, a low vibration that anchored her in place. A pedestrian crossed in front of her, head down, unaware of anything beyond the small world directly ahead. When the light turned green again, she moved forward, not fast, not slow, just steady. A few blocks later, she turned into a narrow side street, then another, each turn taking her deeper into a part of the city that did not draw attention. The buildings grew quieter, the lights dimmer, the space more contained. Finally, she pulled into a small, unmarked garage tucked between two larger structures. The door was already open, just enough to allow entry, as if it had been expecting her. She rode inside without hesitation, the engine echoing briefly against the concrete walls before she cut it off. The sudden silence felt different here, enclosed, deliberate. The door slid shut behind her with a soft mechanical hum, sealing the space from the outside world. For a moment, she remained seated on the bike, her hands resting lightly on the handlebars, her breathing steady, her gaze forward. The events of the night did not rush her. They settled. After a few seconds, she removed her helmet, setting it carefully on a nearby surface. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, then steadied, casting a pale, even glow across the garage. A door at the far end opened, and the suited man stepped inside, followed by the driver, both moving with the same controlled presence they had carried all night. The SUV had not entered the garage. It remained outside, unseen but understood. The man approached slowly, stopping a few feet away, his expression unchanged, but his eyes sharper now, more focused. "You deviated from the initial route," he said, his tone neutral, not accusatory, but precise. Maya stepped off the bike, her boots making a soft sound against the concrete. I adjusted to the situation, she replied. The man nodded once, accepting the answer without challenge. And the officer? He asked. Maya walked a few steps, then stopped, her back partially turned, her gaze resting on a blank section of wall, as if it held something only she could see. He made a choice, she said. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. The man studied her for a moment, then spoke again, slower this time. You could have forced that choice sooner. Maya turned slightly, just enough to meet his gaze without fully facing him. That would not have been his choice, she said. The distinction landed again, familiar now, but no less significant. The man exhaled slowly, a breath that carried more thought than reaction. Command will ask if that distinction matters, he said. Maya's expression did not change. It always does, she replied. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above them. The garage remained still, sealed from the noise of the city, holding only the quiet presence of three people who understood that something had happened that would not show up clearly in any report. The man nodded once more, slower this time, then turned toward the far door. We will document it, he said. Maya did not respond immediately. She let the words settle, then gave a small nod. We will, she echoed. The driver remained near the entrance, silent, observant, his presence steady but unobtrusive. The moment stretched just a little longer, not because it needed to, but because neither of them rushed to end it. Outside, the city moved on, unaware. Inside, the silence held something quieter. Not tension, not resolution. Something in between. Something that did not need to be. Named to matter. The fluorescent light above flickered once more, then settled into a steady hum that filled the silence without breaking it. Maya moved slowly across the garage, her steps measured, her posture relaxed but deliberate, as if every motion still carried intention even after the moment had passed. She reached a small metal table near the wall and placed her helmet down, the soft sound echoing briefly in the enclosed space before fading. The suited man remained where he was, watching her, not with scrutiny, but with a quiet attention that suggested he was still processing something that did not fit neatly into the structure he was used to. Command will not see it the way you do, he said after a moment, his voice even, controlled, but carrying a subtle weight. Maya did not turn immediately. She rested her hands lightly on the edge of the table, her fingers still, her gaze lowered for just a second before lifting again. They do not need to, she replied. The answer was simple, but it did not close the space between them. The man took a slow step forward, his shoes making a faint sound against the concrete. They will ask if you allowed a variable to remain in play longer than necessary, he continued. Maya exhaled quietly, not in frustration, not in resistance, just releasing a breath that carried thought with it. They always ask that, she said. The familiarity in her tone was not dismissive. It was factual. The man nodded once, acknowledging the pattern. And what will you tell them? He asked. Maya turned then, fully this time, her eyes meeting his with a calm that had not wavered all night. That the variable resolved itself, she said. The words landed with precision, not defensive, not exaggerated, just exact. The man studied her for a moment longer, then shifted his gaze slightly, as if testing the weight of her answer against his own understanding. And if it had not, he asked. The question hung there, heavier now, not procedural, but personal in a way that reached beyond the operation. Maya held his gaze, her expression unchanged, but something deeper moved behind her eyes, something quiet and firm. Then I would have stepped in, she said. There was no hesitation, no doubt. The certainty in her voice did not come from confidence alone. It came from clarity. The man exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing just slightly, as if the answer had settled something he had not fully articulated. You are asking the system to trust something it cannot measure, he said. Maya tilted her head just slightly, the smallest shift, but enough to mark the difference between hearing and accepting. I am asking it to recognize something it already knows, she replied. The distinction was subtle, but it held. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, steady now, casting a consistent glow across the concrete floor. The driver near the entrance shifted his stance slightly, his presence unchanged, his attention still quiet but aware. The garage remained sealed from the outside world, holding only the echo of what had already happened and the quiet understanding that followed. The suited man looked at Maya for another second, then gave a small nod, not agreement, not dismissal, but acknowledgement. There will be questions, he said. Maya nodded once in return. There always are, she replied. The rhythm of the exchange was familiar now, not tense, not strained, just part of the structure they both understood. The man turned slightly, glancing toward the closed garage door as if measuring time against something unseen. We will submit the report in the morning, he said. Maya did not respond immediately. She walked past him, her steps quiet, moving toward a small locker built into the wall. She opened it without hesitation, retrieving a folded jacket and setting it aside. Include everything, she said without looking back. The man paused, then turned his head slightly toward her. Everything, he repeated. Maya closed the locker gently, then turned to face him again, her expression steady. The hesitation, she said. The pause. The moment before the decision. The man held her gaze, the meaning settling deeper this time, not just as information, but as something that could not be easily written into a report. That is not standard documentation, he said. Maya's lips moved slightly, not quite a smile, not quite. Anything that needed to be named. It should be, she replied. The words lingered in the air, quiet but firm, pressing gently against the boundaries of what was expected. The man did not argue. He did not dismiss it. He simply stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it settle before giving another small nod. The driver near the entrance opened the side door slightly, letting in a thin line of cooler night air that slipped across the floor and faded just as quickly. The city beyond continued to move, unseen but present, its rhythm unchanged. Inside the garage, the silence returned to its steady state, no longer carrying tension, but something quieter, something that did not need to be resolved to matter. Maya picked up the jacket from the table, draping it over her arm as she moved back toward the bike, her steps as measured as before. The night was not over, but what had happened within it had already taken its place, not as a disruption, but as a quiet shift that would remain, whether it was written down or not. The garage settled into a stillness that no longer needed to be explained. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, steady now, no longer flickering, as if even the space itself had decided to stop shifting. Maya stood beside the bike, the jacket draped loosely over her arm, her posture relaxed but grounded, her presence filling the quiet without effort. The suited man remained near the center of the room, his gaze moving once more across the space, not searching, not questioning, just observing, as if committing the moment to memory in a way no report ever could. It will not read the same on paper, he said after a while, his voice low, measured, carrying no urgency. Maya did not look at him immediately. She adjusted the jacket slightly, folding it once before placing it carefully on the seat of the bike, her movements deliberate, unhurried. It is not supposed to, she replied. The answer came without resistance, without explanation, just truth stated plainly. The man nodded once, slowly, the acknowledgement quiet but complete. He turned then, walking toward the side door where the driver waited, his steps controlled, each one carrying the weight of a night that had not gone the way structure expected. The door opened with a soft mechanical sound, letting in a narrow slice of the outside world, cooler air brushing lightly across the concrete floor before settling again. He paused at the threshold, glancing back one final time. You trust moments like that too much, he said, not as a warning, not quite as a critique, but as something that existed between the two. Maya rested one hand lightly on the handlebar, her fingers still, her gaze steady. I trust what people choose when they think no one is watching, she said. The words did not rise. They did not need to. They carried their own weight. The man held her gaze for a second longer, then gave the smallest nod, a gesture that did not signal agreement, but understanding. He stepped through the door, disappearing into the narrow corridor beyond. The driver followed without a word, the door closing softly behind them, sealing the garage once more into its contained quiet. For a moment, Maya was alone. The hum of the lights filled the space, steady, consistent. She exhaled slowly, not out of relief, not out of fatigue, but as if releasing the last trace of the moment from her body. Her hand moved across the surface of the bike again, fingers brushing lightly along the frame, grounding herself in something real, something known. She picked up her helmet, holding it for a second before setting it back down, her movements slower now, less driven by momentum, more by presence. The city beyond the walls continued its rhythm, unseen, unheard, but constant. She walked a few steps toward the far wall, then stopped, her gaze resting on nothing in particular, her thoughts not rushing forward, not pulling back, just settling where they needed to. The night had not demanded anything from her. It had revealed something instead, something quiet, something easy to miss, a choice made in a moment where it could have gone differently, and the fact that it did not matter more than anything written after. After a while, she turned back toward the bike, picking up the jacket again and slipping it on, the fabric settling around her shoulders like a familiar. Wait. She moved with the same controlled ease as before, no hesitation, no rush. The garage door at the front slid open slowly, the mechanism low and smooth, revealing the narrow street outside, dimly lit, empty at this hour. The cool air drifted in again, carrying the faint scent of the city, distant traffic, something almost like rain. Maya wheeled the bike forward, guiding it toward the opening without starting the engine, her footsteps quiet against the concrete. She paused at the threshold, looking out for a brief moment, her silhouette framed by the soft light behind her. The world beyond waited, unchanged, unaware. She stepped forward, the bike rolling smoothly beneath her guidance, the tires meeting the pavement with a soft, familiar sound. Once outside, she swung onto the seat in one fluid motion, her hands settling onto the handlebars, her posture aligning with the machine once more. The engine came to life again, a low, steady rumble that broke the quiet just enough to mark movement. She did not hesitate. She did not look back. The bike moved forward, merging into the empty street, the sound fading gradually as distance took it. Inside the garage, the lights remained on, the space unchanged, holding nothing but the echo of what had been there. And somewhere, miles away, a patrol car idled under fading lights, an officer standing still for a moment longer than usual, thinking about a pause he could not explain, a choice he did not expect, and a silence that had said more than anything else. She did not change the system. She did not stop the night. But she left something behind that could not be unseen. And sometimes that was enough.